So I remember that gut-wrenching feeling before launching my first store and first going into business for myself. It really does. You just don't know what's on the other side of it.
Your stomach feels tight. It's a real feeling in your chest, and you have your mind full of thoughts.
I think people kind of have these plans of like global domination with e-commerce, so they overcomplicate things so much. And from the outset, you think, well, what's your first milestone?
The fear is so prevalent in any walk of life. No matter where you go, if there's something uncertain, that fear always comes up, and I think it's normal.
The longer you wait, the more intimidating it's going to feel. So eventually, you've just got to do it. You've just got to dive in.
You know, you could go after something with the absolute certainty of success. How would you go about things differently if you had that complete certainty?
You can delay and you can overthink and you can procrastinate, and eventually there comes a point where you do just have to say, I'm doing this. Welcome to the Dropship Unlocked Podcast, your key to unlocking the secrets of high-ticket dropshipping. I'm Lewis Smith, founder of Dropship Unlocked, and with me is our client success coach, James Eardley. Now, when we're not recording podcast episodes, we're running our own e-commerce businesses and helping aspiring entrepreneurs launch their own high-ticket dropshipping businesses. So if you're ready to learn how to build your own 6 or even 7-figure business, pick up a copy of my book, The Home Turf Advantage, whether you're looking to replace your income or launch a side hustle. I wrote this book as a roadmap to help you launch a low-maintenance, high-profit e-commerce business that gives you the freedom to spend more time with your family, travel the world, and work on your own terms. Ready to join us? Visit htabook.com to get your copy today. Now sit back, relax, and let's unlock your potential with the Dropship Unlocked podcast.
What if I told you the biggest fear that's holding you back could actually be your greatest ally in starting a successful dropshipping business? There's this fear of failure out there that holds so many people back, and it really is one of the worst things out there because it holds people back from starting and going after the dreams they have. In today's episode, Lewis and I are going to dig deep into why this fear is around and how you can actually use it for your advantage. So, Lewis, first of all, let's dive into it. Why do we think so many newcomers have this strong fear of failure before they go after the dreams that they have?
Hi, James. Yeah, I think it's probably the fear of the unknown, isn't it? It's that overwhelming weight of what lies ahead, the abyss, the unknown, that if you think back to when you were a child and you remember that first day, that first morning before you went to school where your parents were nervous, they've got everything ready for you, you know, you're in your new school uniform, you've got all your bags packed, all the right books, everything's there. There's that kind of nervous apprehension. And there's that pit in your stomach of like, what happens when I'm there? Like, will people like me? You know, you don't know the structure of the day, the people, what it's going to be like. You're going into this new world. And it's a bit like that when we're starting a business, right? It's just that we're doing it in adult form. So, you know, it might be a bit like if you've ever started a new job, you can possibly relate to that. You think back to that morning before you'd gone into the unknown, because as soon as you're there, it's usually fine, right? But before you've gone in, you're thinking to yourself, like all the worst case scenarios are running through your head, and you're thinking, like, what will it be like on the other side when I get in there? That's the feeling that many people face at the prospect of starting a business, right? It's something that we can certainly relate to, and we've all been through it. I like to try to reframe it in a way that's a bit more empowering as well. So if you think that it's not the fear of the unknown necessarily, but it's the thrill of the potential discovery that defines that feeling, you can kind of see it as a positive. So that adrenaline rush, rather than thinking, oh, that's coming to me because of fear, it's not. It's coming to you because of the potential excitement and the discovery of what is on the other side of it. And then that kind of allows you to embrace that feeling and use it in an empowering way rather than a paralyzed by fear kind of way. But I think if we really drill into what the roots of fear are, a lot of it comes from that societal expectation of, you know, failing isn't just this personal thing, because if I've put myself out there into the public eye and then I fail, or, you know, even if I just tell my friends and family I'm doing it, it feels like I'm not only letting myself down if I fail, but I'm letting everyone else down, everyone who's watching me. And it's that same feeling as if you go up on stage to give a speech or something and you just forget your lines. It's that petrified feeling that you get. And a lot of people say that's their worst fear is public speaking because of the sort of what happens if I forget what I'm saying. And so I remember that gut-wrenching feeling before launching my first store and first going into business for myself. It really does. You just don't know what's on the other side of it. So I can totally relate to how that fear can hold you back. If you've ever taken an exam and you've had that apprehension of waiting for the results of the exam, perhaps, your GCSEs or your A-levels, or maybe you're just waiting to find out if you got offered a job that you interviewed for and applied for. That knot of anticipation in your stomach, where it's like hope mingled with fear, and it's this strange mix of emotions, and you don't quite know how to handle it. And I know that I'm not alone with this, and if you're experiencing this as well, you're certainly not alone. Many very successful entrepreneurs have faced nervous moments along their journey, but you just have to look at what they did in those moments and the courage that they had to see it through to the other side. So think of Elon Musk, right? He came days from bankruptcy with Tesla back in 2008. He was burning through cash at such a scary rate with that company, and they couldn't find investors because the economy was in turmoil. It was a mid-2008 crash, right? And he nearly put in all of his own money just to keep Tesla afloat. And it was make or break. It literally came like days, if not hours, from bankruptcy. But ultimately, he had the courage to see it through, and look where he is now and what happened, right? So it was make or break, but it did pay off. And the same is true of many entrepreneurs. Think of somebody like J.K. Rowling and how close she came to not launching Harry Potter. When she first took the Harry Potter transcript of the book through to publishers, she got rejected by so many publishers who just didn't see the potential or the appeal. And they just advised her, stick to the day job, and you're not going to make much money in children's books here. And how wrong they were, right? Because she showed that courage. She overcame that fear that would have held so many people back, because they'd have thought, maybe they're right, I won't proceed. And because of that self-belief and that hard work, she is now where she is, which is because of having that courage to see through that fear.
And it's so important to remember these successful people, and there's so many stories of famous people that had so many failures before they inevitably got to the success they got to. I think it's important to remember, and you can visualize somebody in your life. Think about the most successful person that you know. Maybe it's an uncle or a friend or a friend of a friend, and think about their success. They would have had all of the same fears that you had. Exactly the same. We're all human. Everyone has these fears before we go in to do something new. But the difference is that they did it anyway, and they took the actions that got them to success despite of the fear. I think that's the key there. So you think about these successful people. Sometimes we put them on a pedestal. We think it was all easy for them, but they will have had the same fears. These stories come out over and over again. And importantly, these successful people that we put on a pedestal, in fact, they've had more failures than us. People that haven't started yet, and people that haven't really gone after their goals, haven't had as many failures as the people that we look at as a big success. So you can try and reframe failure in your mind as an essential in order to get to success. And it takes away some of that fear. Certainly did for me when I decided to go after my goals and start my own dropshipping business. So we've chosen dropshipping as our fulfillment model for our business. Do you think that dropshipping could be the answer for somebody that is paralyzed by fear?
Well, it's certainly a lower risk, easier to get started with entry model into business compared to going and spending £100,000 or taking a huge amount of debt out to go and lease a warehouse and buy in loads of stock and then have huge liabilities, right? With dropshipping, very little upfront cost to get started. I'd say it's the perfect entry business model for a new entrepreneur. I mean, I was out the other day with my son, helping him to learn to ride a bike. He's only 2.5 at the moment. And you know what it's like when you first start to ride a bike. You're very wobbly, you're not stable, you're not confident, right? Like us in business, if we're first-time entrepreneurs, we're just getting started, a little bit wobbly, not really sure like kind of what we're doing. Well, I wouldn't just you put him on a mountain bike and be like, off you go. You start out with the small bike, then you have the stabilizers, then you kind of work your way up to it. And so it's very much the same in business. You want to find that support to gain your balance, to get that stability, and then eventually you can start really expanding and diversifying later and doing all the mountain biking and the BMX jumps and stuff like that. But when you first start, if you're just looking to replace your income from your job, well, I mean, if you follow the right dropshipping model and implement the strategy correctly, you don't even need to overcomplicate it. I think people kind of have these plans of like global domination with e-commerce, so they overcomplicate things so much. And from the outset, you think, well, what's your first milestone? Maybe to replace your income, maybe to hit a couple of 100,000 per year in income. And once you've achieved that, then maybe you say, okay, it's working really well, but maybe I've started to hit a bit of an income ceiling at that point. Okay, now I'll look to maybe bring in some stock or start a product line myself. But in terms of overcoming the fear, I mean, the mistakes that you can make in dropshipping is a lot more forgiving because they're not catastrophic mistakes usually. You know, you might spend a little bit too much in ads, or you might take a little bit too long to get order out to a customer, but they're all learning experiences. And I think something that you can do to speed up your learning experience, like shorten that learning curve, is just get around a community of other people who are already doing what you want to do, because that guidance helps us avoid the common pitfalls, because they are common. Like, these are the same traps that people fall into time and time again. So if you're around a group of people that can say, oh, that's something to avoid, that's something to avoid, it gives us that confidence to persevere, because at this stage when you're first thinking of starting, you don't yet know what you don't know. So later on, you might encounter things, and you at that moment, you'll need to ask a community of people that will likely have the answer. But right now, you don't even know the questions, right? Because you can't know them until you encounter them sometimes. It's a bit like if you're bowling and you're a beginner with bowling and you have the bumpers up at the side of the bowling alley. It's to kind of ensure that the ball doesn't end up in the gutter, right? Every time we think that in business we might be veering off course, or we have an issue that suddenly arises in our business and we think, no, this could mean that I end up bowling the ball into the gutter. We just ask the community of others, and they're like our bumpers, right? They keep the ball on track because they're already doing it. So why reinvent the wheel? Just ask a community of people who are already in that place. And I think that's one of the best ways you can really overcome fear. It's just asking others who are already on the other side of it.
Yeah, it's so empowering to know that somebody else felt the same fear or is feeling the same fear at the same time. But after a conversation and connecting with other people in the same position, you can realize how you can overcome that fear together. And other people have done, maybe only a month ago or a year ago, and they can tell you exactly how they got through that particular fear. And it just empowers you so much to have that around you if you can get around a community of like-minded people. I also think it brings the fear into the light. Often the fears that we have are just in our minds and they don't ever come out. We don't ever express them. They just feel like like your stomach feels tight. It's a real feeling in your chest and you have your mind full of thoughts. But if you don't express those or understand what the fears really are, it's easy to enlarge them in your mind and allow them to take over. Something I read in one of Tim Ferriss's books was about the idea of fear setting, and he explained it perfectly. And I read it just at the right time as I was about to start my own e-commerce business. And he tells you to write down all of the fears that you have, put them on paper, bring them into the light, look at them, shine a light on them and see, are they really as scary as you think they are? And that made such a difference. You write down all of those fears. And for me, it was fears of failing and not being enough, being a waste of time, waste of money. And then you think about what the worst case scenario would be if all went wrong. And you realize that that worst case scenario isn't going to kill you. You can stand up to it. And in spite of that, you can still push on. And then realize that the worst case isn't too bad. So we just stop worrying about the worst case and instead allow time in your mind to start thinking about success and paint a vivid picture of how success looks instead. And that's a lot more exciting to go after instead of running away from a fear of failure. So if newcomers have this fear before they start an e-commerce business, Lewis, how would you suggest that they can overcome that fear?
Well, I think the first thing is to assign fear the correct label. You know, if you label fear as this like stop sign that you must stop, you should not proceed, then that's exactly how it will present. But if you can realize that fear isn't necessarily a stop sign, it's more of a give way sign. You know, it means pay attention, don't act too hastily, baby steps at this stage. And instead of worrying about I should not proceed, just think I've just got to pay more attention here. I've got to be alert to the potential dangers and take baby steps. You know, it's like instead of looking at the entire journey and worrying so much about I've got to know the full picture start to finish before I do anything, just focus on the next step. It's like driving at night. You know, your headlights in the car, they don't show the whole path ahead. They just show you the next few meters, don't they? And so then that's the way that you continue driving. But sometimes once you have the right people by your side, you do at some point have to just jump in, because I think you can delay and you can overthink and you can procrastinate, and eventually there comes a point where you do just have to say, I'm doing this, I'm committing. Recently I was on holiday in Greece and it was a little bit chilly and we had a pool that was fairly cold. It wasn't heated, I don't think. And one of my sons desperately wanted to go swimming one morning. Now I knew that the pool was pretty cold. And I knew that if he went and dipped his foot in the pool, he'd say it's too cold and that would be it. He wouldn't want to swim. But I also knew that if he just jumped in, he'd be absolutely fine and we'd have a great time and he'd enjoy swimming. So I didn't give him the option. I didn't say, go and test the water first, then tell me if you want to swim. Instead, I just held his hand and then we counted from sort of 3 down and then we just jumped in the pool. And he initially screamed. He's like, Dad, what have you done to me? And it's absolutely freezing. But then within a few seconds, he's laughing, he's throwing him around and he'd forgotten it was cold and we had a great time, right? And it's the same in business. When we over prepare and we overthink and we try and plan for everything, we're like, I'm going to need to put a thermometer in the pool first to detect whether the temperature's optimal for swimming. We're over analyzing. And when the time comes, we just either got to make that jump or we're not going to do it. You know, it's easier when we're doing it with someone else that's already knowing how to swim. You know, if someone else is there with us jumping into the pool or is already in the pool and says, come in, it's fine. Now, once the temperature adjusts, right? That's like joining a community. They say, yeah, it's scary at first, but jump in and you'll be fine because we're all in here and it's working well, right? So I think a thought exercise that's quite helpful, that hopefully will help you if you want to try to reframe fear a little bit, is just take note of it and think, in years to come, this moment that I'm experiencing fear in right now will be an incredible, amazing, exciting chapter to tell as part of my own entrepreneurial story. You know, so imagine your life as a movie, and this scene right now of the fear will be something that you'll be able to tell your children, your grandchildren in years to come. You are the lead character in this movie. And what that does is it kind of helps remove you from the events and the emotion, and you get to see it almost like a third party watching in, and you see it as this scene in a movie where you're the main character. And it's a useful exercise to be able to think, I'm not defined by this moment and this fear. This is just another chapter on my journey to success.
Yeah, and that exercise reminds me of having the thought about what would I do if I absolutely knew that I would succeed, and just reframing that in your mind and realizing that, you know, you could go after something with the absolute certainty of success. How would you go about things differently if you had that complete certainty? And similar with that question about zooming out and looking at yourself going through a difficult time before you get started, zoom out a few years and realize that that was all part of the journey before you got started and took the necessary actions to get to the success you have. So take away that fear by having that guarantee of success. And of course, getting around other people can help you get to that success. It reminds me of that pool story you were explaining, Lewis. I was on holiday recently as well in Greece, and my girlfriend and I, we were laughing around the pool because it's quite amusing actually watching everyone get into the pool. There's not a heated pool, and everyone has the exact same reaction. And often there's a couple going in together, and perhaps say he goes in first, he puts his toes in, and he just jumps in because he realizes that there's only one way to get into this. And then he looks back at his partner and she's doing the same thing. And they always have that same expression when they first realize that the fear of the cold. But the partner who's already in the pool, they always say the exact same thing. They say, it's fine once you're in. And it's so true. And eventually that persuades the other person in the relationship to jump in, and they realize that it is absolutely fine once you jump in. And you need somebody perhaps to have already gone in to tell you that it's fine once you jump in, to have been through that fear and done it anyway, and use that to inspire you to take action as well. So once people perhaps have got over that fear and they've gone into dropshipping, what would be the next steps that they can take to really propel and accelerate their success?
Yeah, well, firstly, just being aware of the attributes that make dropshipping the ideal business model in this scenario. Focus on its strengths and know that dropshipping allows you the flexibility, the scalability, and the buffer room to be able to make some mistakes and it be quite a forgiving business model when you get started, certainly more so than a lot of more traditional business models and other types of e-commerce. Remember as well that you don't need the full picture. I think this is something that really holds people back because they feel like they need to have all the answers to all of the steps. There's a reason why we work through it sequentially in a 6-week program. It's because the stuff that happens in week 6, you don't need to know about it in week 1. And if you did, it would probably be overwhelming. So we just provide that information as and when it becomes necessary to you. I went out for a run this morning before we were filming this podcast, and for anyone that doesn't know, we film these podcasts early morning. So I went out for a run and it was pitch black outside, and I needed one of the, the chest running lights that you wear that kind of lights the few paces ahead of you, and it illuminates your next few steps and obviously makes sure that cars and stuff can see you as well. And it just kind of reminded me that I don't need to see the entire road, the entire path, everything that lays ahead. I just need to know where I'm running and make sure I don't trip over and make sure that people can see me as well. And so it's the same with business. Like, you can't get overwhelmed by all of the steps that lay ahead. There's a funny story, actually, that it reminds me of my granddad. Years ago, we had these Christmas tree lights that were wrapped around, the ones you wrap around the Christmas tree. And every year they get taken down, they get like stuffed back in a box, put in the attic. And they were so tangled that we looked at them and I was like, oh, just throw them away, like buy some new ones. They're complete, like that will take someone all day to untangle them. But my granddad was like, challenge accepted. And he just sat there in his armchair and just dismantled, like untangled this web of overwhelmingly tangled spaghetti like Christmas wires for hours, like literally hours. Just sat there all day and untangled them. And imagine if he'd sat there when he first looked at those and said, well, I'm only proceeding if I can see exactly how the knot was formed and exactly how to untangle it now. He'd have never got anywhere, right? But because he didn't get overwhelmed by needing to have the full picture, he just did piece by piece, untangled knot by knot. And eventually he ended up with the full lights in one long piece. And we were amazed at how he'd got the whole thing back into one long line, but he didn't get overwhelmed by not knowing the full picture. So I think you just need to make sure that you're happy to go step by step. The other thing is embrace mistakes as lessons as you go. Remember that they're kind of like the tuition fees that you pay for the school of experience. That's part of the process. Remember the main character analogy. Look at yourself as a main character. Imagine if you were going to succeed, what would you do? What would the path be to get you to the point of being a business owner up and running? And don't try and do it alone. Don't try and work on a desert island, because you're making things so much harder for yourself than you need to. If you try and say, I'm doing this as a lone ranger, I'm out there on my own. There are other people right now, today, working from home like you, from their laptops. And you can surround yourself with a positive community of people who can be your bumpers in the bowling alley. You know, they are the people that will stop you bowling into the gutter because they've done it before. And if you can have that supportive team there to keep you on track, that can make all the difference to your success or failure.
Yeah, I can certainly attest for that. The community we have now with Dropship Unlocked is unbelievable. I'm sure they'll be part of the community listening to this episode. And it's such a supportive, friendly, engaged community. And it really pulls everyone along, especially if people have these fears that come up along the way. People can help you out when those arise and tell them each other how they got over those fears and self-doubt that comes up throughout the journey. It reminds me of this quote, which I think is really apt for a conversation. It's from Franklin Roosevelt, and he said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And because fear is really the biggest fear that we can have, because it holds so many people back. I think famously he said that before starting an e-commerce business in 1882. I'm not sure what he was saying in context of, but the context doesn't matter, because the fear is so prevalent in any walk of life. No matter where you go, if there's something uncertain, that fear always comes up, and I think it's normal. I read a recent study that it was around 30% of all new business owners have this fear of failure that holds people back, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was much more than that as well. So to wrap things up, Lewis, for anyone that's thinking about taking a plunge and really starting a new e-commerce business, what would you suggest is the first steps that they would take?
Yeah, the first step, if you're considering taking the plunge, as you put it, is just dive in. You know, it's like waiting to jump into that pool. If you keep dipping your feet in, you keep testing the temperature, eventually you convince yourself it's too cold. The longer you wait, the more intimidating it's going to feel. So eventually you've just got to do it. You've just got to dive in. If you'd like to do that and you'd like to learn every single step necessary to build a thriving dropshipping business, then what you could do is pick up a copy of my book, The Home Turf Advantage. So head over to htabook.com to pick up a copy of that. And just remember, pushing through fear opens doors to unimaginable growth. There's so much good stuff on the other side of that fear. And just, if it helps, remember, it's not the fear of the unknown, but the thrill of the potential discovery that defines that feeling. If you can label that correctly, that it's the excitement that is causing that feeling of what lays ahead, that will hopefully completely reframe it for you and help you push past it whenever you need to. Just a quick heads up, if you'd like to share your questions, stories, successes, or challenges, you can email us directly at podcast at dropshipunlocked.com. And you never know, we might even feature you on the next podcast episode.
Also, if you want access to today's show notes or any of the resources we've mentioned in the episode today, then head over to dropshipunlocked.com/podcast. We also have a small favour to ask of you. If you enjoyed the show so far, if you could take a minute to leave us a rating and review on your podcast platform of choice.
You wouldn't believe how much your reviews help us grow the podcast. We'll even read out some of our favourites on the next episode. So if you want to be featured on the show, please do go ahead and leave us a review today. Thanks so much for your support. We really couldn't do it without you, and we absolutely love hearing what you think of the podcast.
Now we're going to answer a question from a listener of the podcast, Lewis. So this question has come in from Steve. Steve has asked this question because he is a member of the Dropship Unlocked Launchpad community, which he has accessed because he has purchased your book from htabook.com. So I'll read out Steve's question for you now, Lewis. So Steve has asked, what are the typical supply chain challenges for high-ticket products?
Yeah, great question, Steve. So firstly, thank you for sending that in. I mean, the first thing to say is we are fortunate to have suppliers on board with this model who will take care of deliveries and deal with the supply chain and the logistics themselves. So that's one of the beauties of the model, and that's why it's so beginner friendly. It's because we don't need to worry about the fulfillment and the logistics and the importing and the supply chain fulfillment, like all of the more complex stuff that many businesses would have to deal with, because we're partnering with UK suppliers who already have the products in stock in the UK and can just dispatch them out to customers when we send them through the email. So that means that our suppliers are responsible for stocking the products that we sell, and they'll also ensure delivery to our customers using their own couriers most of the time. So we don't really have to get involved in that part. Like we'll get a tracking number or a consignment number usually from a courier, and we can attach that to the order inside Shopify that then sends the correct text messages and email updates to customers saying your delivery is due today between 10 and 11 a.m., that kind of thing. But really, our suppliers kind of keep on top of their stock situations to ensure that they can continue to sell. And obviously, they're incentivized to keep on top of supply and stock, because if a supplier is out of stock, we've got multiple suppliers on any of our stores to ensure that it doesn't affect our ability to sell. So if one supplier goes out of stock of a certain range of products, we'll just push the other products instead. Right. And now that might sound like a bit of a manual process, but it actually happens automatically, because the way we set up our marketing campaigns with our stores is that the ads will actually stop running if a certain product is set to out of stock. So product goes out of stock, the ads stop spending money and stop running, but a different product that is in stock would run instead, and that would continue the machine, right? So customers who are searching for a product to buy, they'll instead see an ad of one of our products that is in stock. And so hopefully that reassures you for how we deal with the supply chain challenges. They really aren't too big of a concern with this model. A really helpful episode of the podcast that covers working with UK dropshipping suppliers and actually how to sign UK dropshipping suppliers that can offer this kind of service would be episode 22 of the Dropship Unlocked podcast, which is titled How to Sign UK Dropshipping Suppliers. So if you're interested, search for episode 22 and maybe line that one up to watch after this.
Perfect. Thank you, Lewis. I think that is the key to dealing with supply chain issues, is to have the right suppliers on board in the first place. So thank you for your question, Steve. And now we had to highlight a recent win from one of the listeners to the podcast and also a member of the Dropship Unlocked Masterclass. His name is Ben, and Ben's first sale was massive, and we had to share it. We had to give him a shout out on the podcast. So Ben shared with us inside the Masterclass community that he's just made his first sale, and his first sale was for £5,750. So massive congratulations, Ben. We had to give that a shout out on the podcast.
Yeah, I love the way he's written his post as well in our community. It starts with, oh my God, I can't quite believe this, but after testing my Google campaigns 2 weeks ago, I've just received my first order for £5,750. So incredible, and I can sense the level of excitement that was going through you there, Ben. So thanks so much for sharing your success story there, Ben. And yeah, I'm sure that will be the first sale of many, many more to come. But just think, if you're making sales for nearly £6,000 per sale, how many sales are you even going to need per month to hit a full-time income? So that's really good. Always love to see members making their first sales, and that's a particularly big one for Ben there. So we wanted to make sure we featured you on this podcast episode today. Did you enjoy this episode? If so, give us a like or drop us a comment on the YouTube video. We might even talk about your comment on our next episode. Also, have you got a friend thinking about starting a business, or maybe who's a bit scared to try? Perhaps this is the episode they need to see. Share this with them and you'll be helping them out. Plus, you'll also be adding to our community of action-taking entrepreneurs. So let's spread the word and help each other out.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Dropship Unlocked podcast. We hope you found the discussion both inspiring and entertaining.
If you're ready to begin your own high-ticket dropshipping journey, then here's what to do next. I've taken all of the years of my own experience, both in running my e-commerce businesses and teaching hundreds of others how to do the same, and I've condensed it all into my book, The Home Turf Advantage. It's your comprehensive guide designed to help you create your own e-commerce business. And you can grab your copy today at htabook.com.
Stay connected by subscribing to the podcast. This way you'll never miss an episode packed with valuable insights. And if you enjoyed what you heard today, please leave us a review. Your feedback motivates us and we love sharing our favourite reviews on future episodes.
And thank you for deciding to spend your time with us today. We really appreciate you and we look forward to sharing more high-ticket dropshipping insights with you on our next episode of the Dropship Unlocked podcast.